Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Atheist Reformation with a special Sunday service for everybody. And also, a special announcement on this one. There's going to be two shows today. One that's happening right now and another one later on this evening with William Albrecht, my general co-host when it comes to the beer stream. So there will be a beer stream tonight. So looking forward to that. Today, we're talking with Mr. Harry. He is an evangelical Christian from Texas. And we're going to discuss a few things about philosophy, figure out what positions he holds, and if you guys like him, well, perhaps he can make a comeback. How are you doing today, Harry?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm happy to join you for your special Sunday service.
Well, I thought about calling it Sunday brunch, but at the same time was like, I don't know, that seems a bit too on the nose, so we're going with Sunday service.
All
right, so have you always been a Christian, recent convert? What's the story there?
Well, I mean, in a Protestant theology, no one is really considered to always be a Christian. There's always some kind of point of conversion. But my conversion was super, super young.
Okay. I've had another guest on here before, a guy named Anthony Brooks. He's a Protestant, but I think he's a Presbyterian Protestant or some kind of Reformed Protestantism. And so does your particular breed of Protestantism, does that jive with what he believes? Do y'all share common ground? What are there differences? What are some of the things that go on between interactions with those two groups?
Well, I'm Baptist, and so there definitely are differences between Presbyterianism and Baptist theology. Some people would specifically put me in the category of like Southern Baptist, which I know there's a lot of people out there that are just like, oh no, evangelical Southern Baptist, how do you like that? But there are differences. A lot of the differences are not really openly. We don't debate about them a lot because they're not that important. Most of the notable differences between Presbyterians and evangelicals, especially Baptists, has more to do with economics of the backgrounds. Presbyterian is more of a, I'm not saying this to be mean to anyone, but they're almost like a higher class denomination.
Okay.
They usually come from more money. It's historically been that way. There's a lot of charity that they participate in through building, donating universities, building hospitals, things like that. Baptists typically come from not so affluent socioeconomic background. And so a lot of their charity work is more based on giving.
Donating time and stuff like that, going out and participating in the community, so to speak.
Exactly. That's what we try to focus on.
Okay. So let's see. What have you encountered? Have you had any dealings with Reformed Presbyterianism and things like that when it comes to how they discuss arguments for God? Because a lot of what they do, or at least on the apologetic side of things, is they argue particular points, but they argue in a very particular way that I'm not going to say is entirely unique to them, but it's one that they use probably more than any other form of Christian theology. And that's the tactic of presuppositionalism. Are you familiar with that one?
I have zero familiarity with that. And the biggest reason is because imagine like a family get together where you have people that have gone on and lived in other states and you all come back for Thanksgiving and you may razz each other a little bit, but you don't usually pull out like your actual arguments. You don't really get into trying to, hurt each other or attack each other. You're just kind of happy to see each other. And that's what it tends to be like a lot of times whenever different groups of Christians get together. Like if I'm hanging out with Catholics, Presbyterians, Lutherans, Methodists, we kind of focus on what we have in common and not so much the differences.
Okay, well, that makes sense. See, I've not really encountered many Baptists, or I've actually you're the first Baptist, I believe, that I've actually had on the show. Usually who I end up discussing things with tend to be more of the Catholic or just Reformed Protestantism. Those two particular veins, because on the show, we do try to discuss philosophy more than anything else, and try to avoid the weeds of things like modern political issues and things like that, because that's where people really tend to diverge from each other, and you really try to start to see communication breakdowns at that point.
And to a degree, I can see that, but modern political discussions are pretty much inherent to Baptist theology.
Okay.
Because we see our role as not necessarily to try to bring the kingdom of God to earth. We are not trying to bring the church into the state. There is a strong separation of church and state, especially if you go back to the Danbury Baptist Association.
Right.
We really like that separation. A lot of people that aren't as informed of their beliefs in the Baptist community may be against that, but it's unfortunate because a lot of them, they just don't really know what they're talking about, or they don't really know where they're coming from. They just know what they hear on TV that they like, and they want to mimic that.
Yeah, I can see that.
But a lot of the important theological issues in Baptist theology have been about the equality of people before God, which is why Baptists were at the forefront of the abolitionist movement. So, universal suffrage, and right now one of the main issues is pro-life stance. There's an intellectually thought out stance for the pro-life position, but that's not really the main thing we're talking about. I'm just explaining that Baptist theology really focuses on a lot of these political issues.
Okay. So in the vein of the pro-life thing, me personally, at least as far as this show is concerned, I try to avoid political discussion to a degree, because like I say, I do think it kind of diverges from the conversation of philosophy, rhetoric, and the communication that different communities have with each other. Now, granted, there are some massive political differences between one group and another, obviously. Otherwise, it wouldn't cause people to be at each other's throats on a daily basis. So I'm not going to offer any kind of rebuttal to you on this one. But I do want to ask to kind of give you a platform to voice what is the Southern Baptist intellectual approach to endorsing pro-life.
So there's two prongs to it. The first one is all life is completely sacred. All life was allowed to exist by God, so therefore it is worthy of being protected. The right of the individual to be able to make any kind of decision or have any kind of life requires them to be alive. So there are groups of Baptists that are very much against the death penalty for the same reasons. It's a strict, life is sacred. You should only take life in terms of self-defense or to protect an innocent.
Okay.
And basically that's one prong of it. The other prong that unfortunately people overlook is that if life is sacred, then it's kind of our responsibility to do what we can to assist those in need. So you can't just tell someone you don't deserve to, you shouldn't be allowed to have an abortion if you're not going to step up to the plate and participate and try to provide some kind of assistance to them in their time of need. If you're going to say that God loves them and loves their child and wants them to exist, then you should also be able to step up and say, God wants me to help you through your time of need so that you can have some of that burden taken off. And that's really the role of the church.
Okay. So, like I said, I'm not going to offer any kind of direct rebuttals, but I do have a couple of questions here. One of them being, when you look at your first prong, and you're saying that this is an intellectual approach to it, you get into the issue of, is life sacred? So from a theistic or theological standpoint, you would say yes, very much so, that life is sacred because that life has been deemed sacred by God. But my question is this: how do you try and get that point across to, say, the atheist community? Because you do see that a lot of the atheist community is pro-choice. They seem to be pro-choice in in wide swaths. There are some outliers, statistical outliers here and there, but you have that with virtually any kind of group or any kind of community. So how would you present that to an atheist who doesn't share your, I hate to use this term, but your presupposition of the existence of a deity? How would you communicate that? How would you revise that standpoint?
I wouldn't use the word sacred to start with. I wouldn't use any words like holy or God's will or anything like that, because that would be appealing to the flying spaghetti monster to them. It has no bearing on them.
Right.
But those beliefs are not the intellectual part of it. The intellectual part is the requirement or the necessity of life to be protected in order for any other right to be protected. So this goes back to almost like a constitutional argument. And so a lot of this will hold more bearing in America than it would in other countries, because a lot of it is based upon our understanding of our interaction with it. And there's more Baptists in America. So there's a stronger connection with the American liberties and Bill of Rights. But basically, if you have any other rights, a freedom of self-expression, a freedom to pursue or to not pursue religion, a freedom to possess a weapon, a freedom to not have your privacy infringed upon, or any of those other rights, you have to exist in order to get those rights. So if your decision is being taken away from you because you don't have the right to conscience because you're dead, that would be the starting point. Now the question is, what is considered life? And that is a debate that we really don't have legal or scientific arguments about. At what point does the, for lack of a better word, soul come into existence? At what point is consciousness and preservation of self inherent within the brain or the identity of an unborn child? Do they react for self-preservation? Do they show brain signals? When do we draw that line of first or second trimester or anything like that? What science is that based upon?
Okay. Usually it tends to be based upon, at least to my knowledge, to the level of response to pain stimulus and things like that, such as when they conduct an amniocentesis and procedures like that. Now, as far as the entire medical science side of things, I am not very well versed on that, as to how it's determined, the level of viability of the child or anything of that sort. So I'm not really going to get into the weeds on that one. So going back to that, you're talking about levels of consciousness and things like that. So I'm trying to think of how to word this appropriately.
And maybe it'll help if I break it down into,
Sure, go for it, please.
Of the personal and the religious, and then there's a realm of what we expect society to accommodate. Okay. The realm of the personal and the religious is that do everything you can to prevent an abortion from being required or perceived to be required by the expectant mother.
Okay.
Whatever you can do as an individual to prevent that from being done, do that. Personal don't have them yourselves if you're sharing this religion.
Okay, so in that vein of thought, would you say that let's just say for whatever reason, even though abortion rights do exist in this country, much to the chagrin of some people, and also to the disagreement of most of the religious community, say for whatever reason that all of a sudden everybody decided to come to the table and decide, hey, let's talk out a compromise on things like this. Where do you draw the line on what is acceptable and what is not? Would you be in support of, say, what's deemed a medically necessary abortion, such as it's a threat to the life of the mother or the child will not have any kind of quality of life, incidents of sexual assault, incest, things of that nature? Or would you want those thrown out along with elective abortion, which is what seems to be the biggest beef that the religious community has with that medical practice.
So I'm assuming this table we're coming to is more on the social political aspect. We're not,
Yes.
where it's not.
Yes, it would have to be at that point. Just discussion. If the two were to try to compromise, what would be something that you could see as a viable compromise between these two communities? Because, as the old saying goes, either one person gets what they want, or this person gets what they want, or nobody gets what they want, and we call that compromise.
So I've done a lot of thinking about this, and my particular views may not be the same as everyone, but that's one of the great things about being a Baptist is you can disagree with people. And
I would say it's almost requisite.
Yeah. Yeah, we have like a million different subcommittees for everything.
Well, I have to quote Matt Dillahunty on this one, because he used to be Baptist. He was Baptist for 30 some odd years, I want to say. And it was like, if you want to know what's wrong with the First Baptist Church, you go to the Second Baptist Church. And if you want to, but also if you want to know what's wrong with the preacher of the First Baptist Church, well, you go to the little old lady sitting 2 pews back who's griping at her husband the entire sermon.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of discontinuity there, I would say, at least on the social aspect within some of those communities.
Yeah, if you're listening, look it up later. I think Emo Phillips had the greatest religious joke of all time, which focuses on the punchline has to do with Baptist, and it's 100% accurate.
Okay. Oh wow. Okay, a joke that's 100% accurate. That's going to be something to see, I think.
All right. So, anyways, going back to this, the first thing that we would do, or that I would expect, is in terms of religious accommodation under the First Amendment. If I am paying taxes in order to pay for an abortion, that is requiring my participation and support of something that is antithetical to my beliefs. So this would be kind of the equivalent of if someone was forced to have their taxes go toward an evangelical missionary ministry. If you found out that the United States government was giving monies to the Gideons to print Bibles and to have them sent to other countries, you'd be like, that's my tax money.
Right.
That's kind of how pretty much all of us feel on that, is don't use my tax money specifically for elective abortions. Let's cut that out.
Okay, so basically you would want to cut funding to organizations such as Planned Parenthood.
Right. And there's a lot of people that say, well, that's already the case because of the Hyde Amendment. And that's where we start getting to the fuzzy territory that, let's be honest with ourselves, Planned Parenthood is not the most transparent organization on earth. They have a really shady history, and their bookkeeping is very fluid in terms of what they consider to be part of their nonprofit and what they consider to be part of their political. And there's a back end that doesn't really clarify what's taxable, what's not taxable, what's supposed to be helping people, and what's supposed to be furthering their political agenda and is actually PAC money.
Right. Well, see, I kind of have issues with a lot of different nonprofit organizations, especially those that claim to be charities that don't actually do anything, that 97% of their donations end up going to executive salaries, and less than 3 cents on any dollar actually goes toward any kind of program that helps the group they're claiming to be advocating for. So if any group, if any nonprofit organization does that, I immediately have an issue with them. Just because to me it seems an incredibly dishonest practice. It's more like we're just sitting. It's like when you have, unfortunately, a more common practice with some select YouTubers, the art of e-begging, where they will make some kind of heartfelt video and this, that, and the other, where they're like essentially begging people to donate money to them or to support their show financially and things like that. And on that note, yes, I do have a Patreon for this, but I put a link in the descriptions of my videos. If someone wants to, for some reason, lose their mind and part with some hard-earned cash and send it my way, I'll always be grateful. But by no means do I do this for money or anything like that. I do this to have discussions with people, because personally I see that there are some channels, there are some individuals and groups out there that only do YouTube to attack certain philosophies or attack certain organizations. Now, some of those organizations, I firmly believe, deserve to be attacked on all fronts. One of them being the NIFB, the New Independent Fundamental Baptist, I think is what that actually stands for. Stephen Anderson's church. I know you're not affiliated with him. Otherwise, this would be a very different conversation that's going on. And other organizations, I firmly believe, need to be addressed in perhaps not the most polite ways all the time. Would also be, I hate to say it, but Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons. I mean, because it's a pretty clear delineation of where some of the issues are with those particular belief sets, like Mormons, for instance. Okay, completely dispensing with the magic underwear. You have a religion that is quite literally developed by a con man, a convicted con man.
So I'm going to run to the defense of those organizations and those different groups.
Okay.
And here's what I'm going to say. As a Baptist, whenever I look into their literature, I look into their holy scriptures, and I look at it and I say, this is not compatible with my beliefs at all. You know, I love you. God loves you. This is not what I'm going to do. So,
well, I wouldn't even call that a defense. That's just you respecting the person for who the person is. And I'm the same way. If I had a Jehovah's Witness sitting here on the show, we would conduct a polite conversation. Now, if things started veering towards the crazier side of things, or making blatant assertions with no evidentiary backup or no even attempt to do so, which has happened before, not on here, but in actual face-to-face conversations I've had with people, you know, yes, I'm going to take them to task and say, hang on, no. We are not going any further in this conversation until you address these key issues, because you brought them up. So you need to defend them. You need to show support for this claim and explain why it is you hold this position. Because I firmly believe that you can very much respect an individual without respecting an idea they present, because ideas in and of themselves have no agency, and so they don't garner respect in any shape, form, or degree. To give an idea respect is to give it agency. And so I fully believe I can ridicule an idea while being respectful to an individual.
Well, here's the second part of it, though, is that I do specifically want to stand up and mention that we have to realize that Jehovah's Witnesses specifically are being openly persecuted in other countries. It's not something we see so much here in America, but we do need to recognize that there are some nations like Russia in which, for having those beliefs and participating in discussing those beliefs with other people who share your religion, you could be arrested, you could be beaten, and you could have your livelihood taken away from you. And the same thing's going on with homosexuals in Russia.
Yeah, that's kind of something that's going on around the world with homosexuals. And, you know, I don't believe that any one person or any individual or group of people should be openly persecuted or openly targeted by a particular government or anything like that to shut them down. However, if they do start to exhibit a cult mentality with their levels of indoctrination, their behavioral control, and their thought control and emotional control, basically hitting on all four sections of the bite model, then we start to have a problem, and they need to be looked at more closely and have their ideas, their precepts, their tenets analyzed a lot more closely, and then apply that analysis alongside with what are their tactics, what are their organizational regulations that they do in order to maintain what they maintain. And when you look at Jehovah's Witnesses, they very much do hit very high on some aspects of the bite model with things such as disfellowship, shunning, being openly hostile towards apostates of their particular faith. And so the ramifications of individuals who even question within that group are essentially, at first they're shunned until they effectively decide to reconform with the groupthink, or if they don't, they're eventually disfellowshipped, and they're told, and their families are even told, to not associate with them at all. And we do see this happen. In fact, there's actually a fantastic channel here on YouTube called Telltale, Telltale. If I get the chance, I'll jump in the description after this live stream's over and put a link in there to Telltale's channel. And he is a former Jehovah's Witness. And some people didn't actually believe to what degree the organization itself was hostile towards apostates, to the point where he's like, okay, well, I'll show you. And he documents himself walking up and starting talking to people who are out there proselytizing in public, and then eventually communicates to them, well, okay, I'm actually an apostate. He's not rude. He's not disrespectful. He just walks up and starts a conversation. In some instances, an elder, usually an older man, walks up and says, you need to leave. If there's not one of those type of individuals around, they would turn away and face the wall of a subway and pretend he wasn't there. I mean, so that's an organization that is hitting high enough on the cult scale of mentality and practices that I don't really consider any of their positions from a political standpoint, or even from a philosophical standpoint, even worthy of giving credence to, because they are so out there and because they do that to their own people.
So regardless of whether you think that they deserve credence or respect to their specific beliefs, the idea is, no matter how high someone would rank on the bite scale,
Mm-hmm.
what would be the role of the government in suppressing their existence?
I wouldn't say as far as suppressing their existence. I mean, we see what happens when that's been attempted before, when they attempt to exercise a lawful arrest or a lawful arrest warrant. We saw that with the Branch Dravidians. Yeah. We saw what happened with Jonestown and things like that. So what the FBI has done for the most part is adopt a pretty straightforward approach of, we sit back, we let them do their thing, we observe, we pay attention. If they start to show signs of a true extremist activity, such as, they start buying all sorts of provision supplies for the end of the world, and then just say, for whatever reason, they decide to go out and each one of them buy like 3 or 4 AK-47s a piece, or anything that kind of indicates these people are gearing up for something, well, at that point, you want to take a little bit of a closer look. Don't prevent them from exercising their rights. Don't prevent them from doing anything that they would normally do, but just to be aware and pay attention of a group like that. And I think that is the case with the Jehovah's Witnesses, especially specifically the Watchtower organization side of that.
So the two examples that you named, just as kind of the specific examples that could relate, both of those cases had very specific laws that were being broken, that were outside of religious belief.
Right, and that's why I'm saying, I'm not saying suppress the belief in and of itself. In that part, I actually disagree with what the Russians are doing. I disagree with the fact that it's that it's open governmental persecution of any particular group, regardless of what their beliefs are. But when they, within their own group, show these signs of being a cult,
It
that's
definitely legitimizes them. If they're doing those kinds of actions, it would delegitimize your organization as to try to collect converts or anything. It pushes you to the extreme end.
Exactly. And then once you start getting to the point where it looks like maybe you're gearing up for something, at that point, if they're gearing up, say, like, I think it was it wasn't Branch Davidians. I think it was Heaven's Gate that started gearing up buying firearms and things like that. Okay, at that point, you pay a lot closer.
They just buy a bunch of tracksuits.
Yeah. Heaven's Gate was the tracksuits. Man, there's been so many different cults in the 20th century that it's hard to keep track of what they all do. In all honesty,
how would you know if they're going to do a
prom? That's what I was thinking of.
Like breakdance squad, you couldn't tell.
True. It was Rajneeshpuram. That's the one that I was thinking of, not Heaven's Gate.
Okay.
They bought up a whole bunch of property. That they were not a Christian organization, at least not to my knowledge. It was a guru kind of thing. And
if it's the one that I'm thinking of, they weren't even like really religious at all. It was more like a self-help sort of group.
It was, and it wasn't religious. It used religion as a method of control, much like Jehovah's Witnesses use their religion as a method of control over the congregation. And that's about the extent of it to my particular knowledge. Again, there's another really awesome YouTube channel that actually does a really in-depth analysis of Rajneeshpuram, and that's Down the Rabbit Hole.
Okay.
So you might want to look at that one. He has a lot of really interesting videos on there. He doesn't upload very often, but when he does, it's quality content. But yes, Rajneeshpuram was the one I was thinking of, not Heaven's Gate. I think Heaven's Gate was ended up being one of the suicide cults, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, they thought that the comet coming over was going to have a
UFO. They're the ones that were spoofed in what was it? Dude, Where's My Car or something like that.
There was a lot.
They had the tracksuit type things, even though it was like more like clear PVC and all that. And they were going to kill themselves to have their souls catch a spaceship to go to some planet Zeta or whatever the heck it was.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was that one. What else is there? But yeah, when an organization starts doing things like that, at that point, you want to pay a lot closer attention, because chances are by that point, there's most likely a law or two broken somewhere that will allow you to investigate to a certain extent. And again, this isn't about infringing upon religious freedom. Yeah. This is about preventing a dangerous extremist organization at that point. Jehovah's Witnesses, I will freely say, have not attained that. I'm not saying they have. I'm not even saying they will. I sincerely hope they don't. In fact, I sincerely hope they, at some point, honestly and openly review their beliefs and revise them to be a little bit less extreme. And then they probably won't have a lot of the problems that they currently have, because a lot of their more extreme views from a religious standpoint don't even really seem to jive with the text of the Bible.
Well, they have a different set of scriptures that's like an addition.
Yeah, the Tays Bible, or no, it's called the NWT, the New World Translation, or something like that.
Yeah, it has that's not in the regular traditional Bible.
Right.
But this goes back to another thing. A lot of times, whenever you have organizations that are religious and you have things you disagree with them on, a lot of times it's not even their beliefs that's the problem; it's their practices.
Yes,
it's the way their beliefs, and that is something I think that is a much more that's a much more approachable way. It's very hard for me to tell someone you need to change your beliefs. It'd be a lot easier for me to say, think about the impact of how you're expressing them. You
Yeah.
know, you're ostracizing your loved ones instead of trying to correct them. Is that really the end goal that you're going for?
Right. And well, that was perhaps poor word choice on my part, saying to openly look at potentially analyzing and revising your belief structure, more analyzing your current religious practices, recognizing where the flaws are, where they don't even really jive with Christianity as a whole on a belief standpoint. The practices don't jive. And then revise that, do better,
Yeah.
because anything and everything can improve. It just has to honestly approach the topic of improvement and figure out where it is those areas of improvement are and then do it. I mean, we've seen that with some of the concessions made by the Catholic Church with the papal acceptance of evolution, um, saying that it did not conflict with Catholic belief or Catholic doctrine. Some think it does. I think it does if they believe that the Genesis account is a literal account of how things came to be or how things got to where they are now. There's a few issues there if you take a literalist interpretation to it. But I don't believe the Catholics do, or at least not the majority of them. I mean, hell, Kitzmiller v. Dover, when intelligent design was discussed and ousted as creationism with a different code on, which it actually is. One of the key witnesses against ID was Dr. Ken Miller, a devout Roman Catholic who was an evolutionary biologist. I mean, so I think that goes a long way. And I'm never going to be a person that says that someone who's religious can't do science or can't do good science, because they can and they do. For instance, one thing that's always fascinated me is still to this day paleontology. And one of the best paleontologists in the 20th and 21st century, hands down, is Robert T. Bacher. He's a Pentecostal preacher, but he does good science. And so that's where I'm of the mind that it's not really an issue what your beliefs are, as long as you can approach science in the methodologically naturalistic way that it requires you to approach it.
Yeah. And for a lot of Christians, we understand that there's a difference between the ideas that we have based upon faith and our religious views, and then the way that you conduct yourself in a scientific viewpoint. It's kind of like, to us, it's the same as whenever you're sitting around joking with your friends and you're watching a football game, and then how you behave when you're at work.
Right.
That's not antithetical to who you are. It's just that you express your personality in different places based upon your setting. And that's what, to a lot of us, science and religion kind of is it's a setting of how we express ourselves.
Okay.
And there are times that it may appear that religious views.
Let me stop you right there for just a second, Harry. I'm gonna shut my camera off for a moment so I can move a couple things around, and then I'll be right back on. But I can still hear you, so please keep on with your comments, and I'll chime in if I need to.
Okay. Yeah. No, I was just saying that to some people it may appear that there's contradictions, but a lot of times it's people don't go around with trying to live in conflict or trying to have cognitive dissonance. But there are things that you see as compatible based upon your personal views of them that don't always make sense to other people. So there are a lot of scientific ideas that I really don't have a particular beef with,
Mm-hmm.
but I just may not put a lot of weight into them. Kind of like people may not put a lot of weight in different kinds of philosophies. Like people may understand Platonic forms, but they just don't really think about it or care that much about it. And if it contradicts with something that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, then, they'll just dismiss it and it's not that important. And for a lot of evolution, that's how I kind of feel. Is my religious view is that at least humankind was made from dust in God's image. Yes, creationist. That's my religious view for at least mankind.
Okay.
Now, if all the fossil records and everything shows that, there was a single fish that became all the different kinds of fishes in the world, and there was a single lizard that became all the different kinds of reptiles, and all the divergence and everything took place from there, and even people over time grew into like the different races that they are, I'm okay with that. But I think that in what I believe is that people at least were created independently of the rest of the animal kingdom. And I don't really like grouping people in with animals whenever we discuss it as one of the animals of earth, but I'm not going to, pitch a fit in a classroom if someone includes people in the animal kingdom because, we reproduce, we have some kind of sentience, we move around. We're obviously not plants. But
right, we're definitely, well, we're not plants, but one thing that we do share in common with plants is that we are eukaryotes. We are part of the eukaryotic clade. And see, that's something that a lot of people, I guess, seem to have a lot of misconceptions is there's not going to be, one lizard from which all reptiles come from. There's not going to be one fish from which all fish come from and things like that, because one of the biggest misconceptions, and it seems that you might be making that same misconception here, is that evolution happens to populations. It doesn't happen to individuals. Mutation, genetic drift, natural selection, sexual selection, all of these things happen at the population level. They don't happen at the individual. And so that's something that's a big misconception that a lot of people have. And in fact, in evolutionary biology, they don't even use the label fish or reptile, because those two terms are so nebulous, because there's no clear scientific definition for what is a fish and what is a reptile, because we have fish like reptiles, we have reptile like fish to certain
so
degree.
I guess describing it, or if I were to use the right nomenclature, would have been I don't really have a problem with the idea that large groups or large amounts of different species had a similar or the same ancestor.
Okay.
And that whatever species it was, all million of them that were swimming or flying around or whatever, ended up over time their offspring having different characteristics and behaving in different ways. I don't have a problem with that so much. What I have a problem with in terms of my religious views would be saying that people were also from that same thing.
Okay. Well, I mean, we are. I mean, that's the long and short of it. Like, you can
but it has
go through and look at it from a genetic and morphological standpoint. We can go all the way back and we can figure out from gestation to death what our species does, that it shares in common with each ancestral clade that it's descended from. Like, for instance, if we just start right here and now, okay, we're hominids, we're part of hominoidea, humans. Okay, we share common ancestry with great apes. We share common ancestry with primates. We share common ancestry going back far enough to, in particular, old world monkeys, because of the genetic and morphological marker of we are able to walk upright. We have more upper body mass than lower body mass, and we have a downward facing nose and no tail, or downward sloping nose, excuse me. all those are marks of, in particular, Catarrhine monkeys or Old World monkeys, which we share common ancestry with.
So
we can go all the way back to
your
Eukaryotes.
As it relates to technology. If you were to say in this analogy or this metaphor that Orville and Wilbur Wright were God,
okay,
and airplanes were humans,
okay,
would you say that they created airplanes, or were airplanes an evolution of bicycles and gyroscopes and other wheeled transportation from before?
Well, the problem that you run into is, and that's actually considered a fallacy of equivocation, and also a category error. Airplanes don't reproduce, neither do bicycles or gyroscopes.
Well,
so
right.
even in that regard, you just don't have that. I mean, we can take it a step further and say that God could make himself known to the world in such a way that there was absolutely no doubt in anyone's mind that that was indeed God talking to everyone. Evolution, as it stands, would still be literally applicable and factually true. Nothing about that would change. Because this is what the evidence shows. Everything about it would remain exactly the same. It's just now there'd be a deity in the mix. But we still have no evidence that a deity had, or anything supernatural had, any kind of influence upon the evolutionary process. I mean, no, we cannot test specifically for the supernatural. But one thing that I kind of posit in things like this is, if we're talking about the supernatural and it's somehow affecting the natural world, okay, well, if it's affecting the natural world, there should be some way by which to measure that. To maybe not specifically say, okay, that is a supernatural thing that caused it, or that's not a supernatural thing that happened, but derive at least to some level, at least a level of causation from it.
So this kind of goes back to the whole discussion about how a lot of the beliefs are intertwined with politics and policy in Baptist theology. So at the end of the day, I'm not going to expect to go into a science classroom and convince everyone that creationism should be taught as biological fact. I'm not going to go into a biology lab and say, okay, throw away everything you know about genetics, throw away everything you know about DNA, creationism, accept it, move on. That's not going to be helpful to the scientific community.
No.
But there's nothing that the scientific community can really come to me and say that I need to throw away the idea that humans are unique and individual from the rest of the animal kingdom. That's not going to change my mind. And the main reason for that is, even if I were to accept that all of the animals and evolution applied to the natural kingdom, that all happened, my beliefs are that there's, at some point, even if it's indiscernible to the scientific paleontological records, that humans were created individual and separate from the rest of the animal kingdom, because there is some kind of difference between us. There is something that makes us unique. Now,
see, therein lies the issue, though, is what I keep trying to get at with most people on this topic. Is, okay, evolution expects to see differences from one species to the next, from one daughter clade from its ancestral clade. But if you're going to have special creation and you want to claim uniqueness because of it, then why is it that there are all these genetic similarities, and the fact that we can trace back through our genetic lineage that we are related to these other animal species? Like,
So I'm going to ask a very question,
okay,
which is, if you had two horses and you wanted to breed them together so that you could create an offspring that had desirable traits, should you be allowed to do so if you own those horses?
okay, so you're getting into eugenics on that one. That has nothing to do with evolution. Eugenics in and of itself is, in large part, as far as the quote unquote human design or human eugenics, in large part is pseudoscience. I mean, but yes, we do artificial selection with animal breeding and animal husbandry on a daily basis. Yes, we do.
So what moral and ethical standpoint do you have to not apply the same to humans? Now, in my religious views, it's very clear what the moral and ethical standpoints are, which is that humans are different than animals. They have certain inalienable rights that are granted by a divine creator. And so we have a certain amount of respect. We can't just be bred to certain purposes or destroyed or eliminated because we have supposedly inferior or negative traits. There is no inferior trait. There is no inferior race. We all are created by God in his image. So,
well, see, that's in large part of up until the God belief. Up until the God belief, evolution is much the same way. It doesn't see anything as any different from anything else. There is nothing that is considered within evolution to be more highly or lesser evolved than anything else, because evolution is a continual process. There is no end game to evolution. Evolution happens, and it's going to continue happening. And so that's where the whole eugenics argument kind of goes out the window, because the eugenics argument, which most people attribute to early to mid 20th century Germany, and I even hate to bring that up, but it's inevitable in a discussion when eugenics gets brought up.
But it goes back further.
It does go back further than that, but it doesn't go back to Darwin. It doesn't go. Say what?
It goes back to Margaret Sanger, H.G. Wells, and the founding of Planned Parenthood. It's gone back to about the Industrial Revolution. There's eugenics that went back way before Germany, and a lot of people
there were.
Yeah,
and a lot of that was dismissed as pseudoscience within the scientific community, especially here in the United States, because that's not how evolution works. None of those, with H.G. Wells, at least to as far as I can tell, were derived from evolution, or if they were derived from evolution, they were derived from a gross misunderstanding of the process.
It was a gross misunderstanding. He was following I can't remember the scientist's name, but he was referred to as Darwin's bulldog, because Darwin did most of the work on discovering the foundations for what would later be evolution. He did a lot of the observational nature, but there was someone in either Oxford or Cambridge who grabbed onto a lot of his ideas and almost went to the route of making it a religion in terms of his fanaticism toward it. And
you're talking about Thomas Huxley.
Is that the guy's name?
Yes, Thomas Henry Huxley. He worked for the Imperial College of London, received a slew of medals for a lot of the stuff that he did. But yes, he is the one who is known as Darwin's bulldog, but he's known for it because he was an advocate for Darwin's theory, because when you looked at what Darwin was able to discover, that Lamarckism didn't work. And Lamarckism is more along the lines of pushing towards the eugenic pseudoscience nonsense than the Darwinian principle of evolution, which was primarily just natural selection. It's come a way long way since then. And that's one thing that's always kind of irked me is people are like Darwinism this, Darwinism that, when they seem to fail to realize that Darwinism's theory of biological evolution by natural selection is a small part of this massive field of science called evolutionary biology. I mean, because that's where modern medical science is derived from. Cancer research, virtually everything that we do in medical science today is derived from evolutionary biology. In particular, what is colloquially referred to as evo-devo, or evolutionary developmental biology. And that's one of the ways we discovered that, shortly on down the evolutionary pathway from eukaryotes, that we are also deuterostomes. Some people mistranslate deuterostome as being second mouth, but when you actually break down the Greek from it, deuterostome means mouth comes. Well, actually, literally translates as mouth second, as in the mouth develops secondly. So to to quote Aaron Ra on this one, at one point in every single human being's development from conception, you were once just an asshole. Because that's what opens first in human fetal development when you actually go through that. And in all honesty, I would actually really encourage you to look at, specifically, since I brought up Aaron Ra, his video series called The Systematic Classification of Life. Yes, he's an atheist. He can be a bit acerbic in a lot of his videos, but that particular video series, the Systematic Classification of Life series, it is just cold, hard science from start to finish. And I think you would actually enjoy it. And it might actually answer a lot of questions that you seem to have, and he'll answer them better than I will, because he's actually studied this to a far greater degree than I have. I'm looking to remedy that because, next semester I'm taking a biology course as well as a microbiology course. So there's going to be a pretty hard focus on evolutionary principles within those two classes because I want to understand this more. Another good one would be to check out Berkeley's website, because Berkeley has a primer on the theory of evolution and how it explains what it explains and why it's valid. I think that would answer a lot of questions that you seem to have and perhaps dispel a few misconceptions.
Well, I actually don't have a whole lot of questions on the foundations of evolution, because that's not the scientific aspect of it. Isn't really my focus.
Well, no, the systematic classification of life, yes, it's cool hard science and all that, but it's not really getting into why is evolution valid. It's showing you step by step from eukaryote to modern man how we got to this point, how evolutionary science has determined this, and what are the key morphological and genetic features of each ancestral parent clade to all the daughter clades that we're also a part of, that explain what we are as far as an animal species. And that's what I think you might find interesting, is because it's pretty cut and dry at that point as to how modern man exists.
Yeah, let's accept for a moment that it's all like, if I were to join on that side of the view and say that we're all just kind of delineated from the same family tree.
Sure.
At what point do you have a rationalization for any morality or ethics to be applied to us different as a species than any other organism or species? Why would we
don't actually? In large part, we don't, aside from whatever arbitrary distinction we assign for ourselves. And that, for me, that comes from the fact that to most degrees, when it comes to morals, yeah, I'm a moral relativist. It's all pretty much situational ethics and what we do as a group, what we do as a society. And
Okay.
that actually speaks to evolutionary principles of it is beneficial to a species to propagate further and grow faster if there is not a lot of infighting within the species. There's not a lot of territorial disputes and things like that. And
So you're for vaccinations, right?
oh yes, I'm very much pro-vax.
Because measles can wreak havoc upon an entire population.
Yes.
Okay. Why not vaccinate Earth against humans?
Why not? Self-interest would be the only reason not to.
Well, see, this is where we get into like this is where we have to kind of draw a line somewhere. At what point do we choose not to apply morals and ethics to ourselves other than just us being selfish?
That's it though. It is arbitrary.
But if it's arbitrary, then what truth is there in it? It's just ways for us to justify our selfishness. At the end of the day, morality and ethics is just a vindication for enforcing your viewpoint upon others.
Yes.
Then we're in a slope of nihilism where nothing matters.
Yes. I'm an okay. When it comes to things like that, for the most part, I'm an atheist existentialist. I agree with Jean-Paul Sartre in that there is no overarching purpose or meaning to life. Life just is. You exist, you have existence, and you have agency. Any meaning or purpose that comes out of your life is something that you have described for yourself, a goal that you have set for yourself and have sought to attain. Your purpose in life is what you make of it.
So are you pro Second Amendment?
Yes.
Why? Why should you be able to have a weapon that can harm someone else? For the record, I'm pro Second Amendment.
Right.
I'm playing like a little bit of a mind, we're trying to figure out where these ideas go and where they come from. What are rights if there's nothing that separates humanity from animals?
Rights are essentially what we grant ourselves or what we tell someone else they can't take from us. I mean, that is kind of how things are set up as far as that goes. But why should I be allowed to own a weapon? To defend myself, to preserve my life. If someone comes at me with the aggression to take my life, well, then I'm not going to say I believe I have the right to take theirs. But if I have the ability to defend myself, then I will defend myself by whatever means I have available to me, whether I'm using my hands, a brick, a 2x4, or a firearm. It doesn't really matter because that's kind
and
of.
as Americans, we would rather defend ourselves with a handgun than a narwhal tusk.
I'm sorry?
As Americans, we would rather defend ourselves with a handgun than a narwhal tusk.
Yeah, I mean, narwhal tusks are pretty hard to come by, and I want to say those are actually pretty heavily regulated because they're not on the endangered species list, but I think they're on the watch list or something like that.
You did follow the recent terrorist attack in London, right? Where the chef
in where?
In London. It was like a couple weeks ago, last week. The chef stopped.
Oh yeah, where the dude stopped him with a narwhal tusk. Yeah. That was honestly pretty epic. That dude's got a story to tell his great-grandchildren, and that is a story that within his family I don't think will ever die unless his family dies out. But even then, I don't think the internet will let that die.
And this is where we kind of get to and I'm not saying that it's an excuse for my beliefs. I understand how a lot of people will view it that way. And I'm not going to take offense if someone views it that way. But at the end of the day, I have a reason why if someone believed that if someone was able to prove through some kind of survey that certain groups of people had lower IQs, obviously it would be either I believe that it would be either a doctored survey or they would be taking advantage of statistical anomalies, or possibly, there's a lot of ways you can doctor it. But if they were to prove that certain people had lower IQs based upon their socioeconomic or ethnic background,
Okay.
and they that as a justification to give them a separate set of rights than other people that were part of a different class, I would have some major problems with that about the fairness and justice of it.
Oh, I would too. And in fact, in large part, the atheist community would have a lot of issues with that as well, because we don't view any other person as being objectively different than anyone else. Personally, I'm very much pro meritocracy.
But can you say that historically, over the past 150 years, that statement that most atheists would have a problem with that holds true?
Because with the advent of atheism, primarily, considering that atheism is just, for the most part, a lack of belief in a deity, that's neither here nor there. A person's particular political proclivities is generally not going to be informed based on the fact of whether or not they believe in a deity, at least not on the atheist side of things. And in fact, I think you'd be hard pressed to find an atheist that will tell you, yes, because I'm an atheist, this is why I believe this, this, and this from a political standpoint. No, it's just a statement of belief. When you get into the more political aspects of it, like what you're talking about, this whole different set of rights in this thought experiment of people, of a certain group of people somehow or some way being separated from the in-group and being out-grouped as less able, less intelligent, however you want to measure that, whatever metric you want to apply to it. In large part, there'd be widespread issues with that, and a good portion of that would come from the secular humanist community. They're atheists, but secular humanism is a subset philosophy, or really a subset kind of ethics-based thing, and they're dedicated to human flourishing, towards helping people. So in that regard, they would vehemently disagree with that, and their moral standpoint for that would be, we have all this evidence within our moral history and within our scientific discovery and explanations that this is very much not the case. Whatever they're trying to sling at you at that point, quite frankly, is bullshit, and they're gonna jump them about it. And that's going to be how they see things. I firmly believe that, because we see evidence of it with how the secular humanist communities behave within society. In fact, they generally argue for more rights rather than less rights for most people.
So specific groups, I can definitely see that they do argue for more rights and more freedom of expression.
Yes.
When those groups have been in charge of public policy, because right now those groups are not in charge of public policy. They are, for the most part, kind of fringe, non-mainstream groups. Like, they have a presence, but I wouldn't say that they have any political agency.
I don't know about that. The nuns, and not NUN, but the NONES, the ones that claim no religious affiliation or no religious background when it comes to census data, is actually one of the fastest growing belief sets in the country.
And what's the percentage? How many?
Right now, I think it's like 6. Right now, I think it's like 6%. They don't have political clout now, but with the way things are going, it's looking like they potentially could. And this is up from 2% just a few years ago.
So look at countries where that has been the status quo, where they have had political agency, where they have been the majority.
Okay.
Times in history when that has been the case, and what's happened.
What country are you saying is vehemently atheistic, or
Let's
an atheist country?
let's Google it. Figure out what countries have been predominantly atheist or have had a ruling party that was atheist. What countries does that point to?
So the 6 countries in the world with the most convinced atheists. Let's see. China between 40 and 50%. Japan 30 to 39%. The Czech Republic with the same 30 to 39%. France doesn't list a percentage. Australia 10 to 19%, and Ireland. Those are right now the most predominantly atheist countries in the world. And in fact, this is from the Independent, so I'm actually going to share this. Oh no, wrong one. Let's see.
There's also been a lot of countries where there was a ruling party that took power that was that may not have been the highest percentage. And for that, I'm basically thinking of like Stalinist Russia.
Right, you're thinking of Stalinist Russia, but that actually had predominance with the Eastern Orthodoxy, or not Eastern Orthodoxy, but particularly Russian Orthodoxy.
The people were, but was that what the state was?
The state was communist, and yes, the state was endorsed by the Russian Orthodox Church. Okay. So when you look at right now, this is the big map right here. This is through the Gallup International polls, through Statista and the Independent. So you see in the north over here, we're in the 5. Can you see it? All right, you still with me, Harry?
Yeah, I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you just fine. Can you see the map that I've got posted? Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, what's up?
All right, so can you see the screen that I'm sharing here?
Yeah.
Okay, so right here over in China is where our highest concentration is here, and then like I said, you've got France, Japan, Ireland off over here, and the Czech Republic over here. And you look at the other countries that at least return data for it. You have Russia edging towards 9 to 10% over here. The U.S. and Canada in the 5 to 9% range. I mean, so you've got it dotting all over the place. In fact, India is actually lower than I actually expected it to initially be. I'm actually kind of surprised.
Higher?
I don't know. It might be a little higher than I anticipated. China's is way higher than I initially anticipated, especially considering that the whole Chinese new medicine craze and Eastern medicine, that was promoted dogmatically by Mao Zedong, like by Chairman Mao himself, that like the Chinese new medicine and Eastern medicine kind of stuff.
So China,
and that was derived as a lot of, but I would say that China is probably going to be one that's a bit difficult to pin down, number one, because for one, it's China. It's not the most open country when it comes to communicating things about itself. To a degree, they're pretty close knit, but also you have different forms, not necessarily of theism specifically, but things such as, for lack of any other better term, ancestor worship.
Yeah, that's pretty similar in Japan more, where they would have Shinto.
Right, but ancestor worship is a big part of Chinese culture and Chinese history, and a good portion of that still did extend even into the communist regime. But there again, the communist socialist regimes and things like that, they weren't all atheist. In fact, rarely are they, because
So
they
China,
because they recognize the need for religion to hold power. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing the screen and get us back to where we were.
yeah, but China's a pretty good example of the kinds of things that I'm afraid of when it comes to a society that doesn't base their rights upon kind of an understanding that humans, human exceptionalism, that we are different than the other, like the other species on Earth. And what I'm looking at right now is a lot of people probably are aware of the whole Hong Kong thing,
Yes,
but a lot of people may not be familiar with what's going on with the Uyghurs.
the Uyghurs.
The Uyghurs are a Muslim minority in China that they're putting on concentration camps.
Okay. No, I was not aware of that one. So that's actually something that I would like to see discussed and like to see some people make some videos on. And if I actually get an opportunity to, I will try to do that if I can get enough research done where a decent enough video can be made to kind of help call attention to that with my uh, measly 23 subscribers currently.
Yeah, you'll probably get banned in that country immediately once you do, if you're not already. But yeah, they do. It's kind of common there. A lot of people may not know it, but in China they do have labor camps or re-education camps
Yes.
where people who are seen as having ideas or beliefs that are different than what the state endorses, they'll send them there and force them into labor until they either die or change.
Hmm.
You also don't see a lot of disabled people or people with differences from what is considered the mainstream appearance in China, because they don't really protect their rights to exist. They usually will kind of hide them and keep them in other places, which means that children with special needs, people with special needs, are often not given the attention and care that they would need because they're seen as a drain on society, and they're forced out into local areas or hidden in dark orphanages where they'll never see the light of day.
Right, and those are also some pretty egregious issues that I would say definitely need to be addressed. Trying to pull up a few things.
And America and other Western countries have been guilty of a lot of those same kinds of things at different points in time. But the thing is that all of those times have really been where there was a hyper focus on industrialization and a lack of focus on the integrity of the individual and the uniqueness of human rights. And so that's where one of the, that really kind of goes along with my beliefs on things, is whenever you see the impact of those ideologies and what are you fighting for? And I see a lot of danger with a lot of, I see a lot of danger with, and not to attack atheists, because there are a lot of atheists out there that do believe in compassion and ethical treatment of different people.
Yeah,
And that's
the atheist community is the largest, I believe, is the largest community, or gosh, how do I phrase this correctly? There are more atheist vegans and vegetarians than there are in almost any other group or listed belief set of people, if I remember correctly.
That makes 100% sense because they would not see humans as exceptional. They would see us as aggression. I don't mean that as an insult, as not exceptional.
No.
It wouldn't be an exception to the rule. So that would make sense. And in religion, there are a lot of people that use religion to justify absolutely terrible things.
Right. And the thing is, like, the whole atheism, yes, stated atheism is espoused by the Chinese government, but they also do actually recognize other religions. Officially, I believe they recognize, they formally recognize 5 religions: Buddhism, Taoism, Catholicism, Protestantism, and Islam. Even though we're seeing what's going on with the Uyghur sect of Muslims within the Chinese mainland. And the Chinese Catholic Church, oddly enough, is actually considered independent of the Catholic Church in Rome. I don't believe they actually officially recognize each other as being existent or being extant, which is kind of weird.
Much about that, but that really sounds like, is that really accepting Catholicism if you just created your own version?
I mean, maybe. Well, the thing is, like, they didn't. I wouldn't say they created their own version of Catholicism. More that they allowed Catholicism to be practiced, absent the recognition of the papal see, because the whole reason why state atheism was even espoused by Mao Zedong, atheism and communism are not two sides of the same coin, like a lot of people try to make them out to be. They're not. Like, for the most part, I'm a constitutionalist. The Constitution says what it says. That's the rule of law. If you want to change it, there's a ratification process. Do it. It was designed to be a clunky and difficult process. I mean, hell, look at the 27th Amendment, which was passed in 1992. That one was initially proposed in 1789. And that was the amendment to where if the houses of Congress voted to increase their own pay, that pay increase could not take effect until after the next election cycle, I believe, within the House of Representatives. So 2 years after the fact. But anyway, China espoused state atheism specifically because Mao Zedong wanted them to, because he didn't want there to be anyone appealing to an authority potentially greater than his own. So to me, that was purely a political play and was essentially a narcissistic dictatorial move to cement power and control within his domain as he saw it.
So I guess more of, and this will branch off into like a political theory or political philosophy side, but could I see a chief executive of a country being atheist and doing their job well? Yeah, I could see it. Could I see the legislative branch having members that are atheists and doing their job well? I could see that. What I would have trouble seeing is a judicial branch coming to their reasoning or decisions based upon atheism and coming up with a judicial decision that is adequate. That's where I would see some difficulties.
Okay. Now, please reiterate that point, because I kind of caught the tail end of it. I was pulling up some information. So if you wouldn't mind running through at least a short version of that one more time, just so I can make sure I fully understood the point you were making with that.
Okay.
I mean, because there have been quite a few atheist heads of states. I mean, like, we look at the Middle East. Golda Meir, she was the 4th prime minister of Israel. She was an atheist. Yitzhak Rabin, he was the one who immediately succeeded Golda Meir.
So
you look more towards. Go ahead.
When you look at the role of what those jobs do, the chief executiveship is basically to lead the country and to come to find a way to bring everyone together within the nation and to represent the country on the international stage, to execute the law that's been written. That I could see that. I don't really see any religious or political conflicts that could happen from there.
Okay.
When we're talking about writing the law, senators, congressmen, I can see looking at just the facts and creating laws and statutes that apply according to the rules that are there, trying to solve problems through legislation. I can see that. I don't have any problems with that. I don't see a conflict.
Okay.
What I could see a conflict is when it comes to the judicial branch. Like
So the Supreme Court.
Yeah. I could see if you're atheist and you were unwilling to write your judicial rulings with respect to a religious perspective, how that could be an incomplete opinion, because it would deny some of the at least deistic language that is inherent in the Constitution. There has to be an understanding of what the religious morality was at the time the Constitution was written, and how and if that was being invoked in order to fully understand the issue.
Okay. Well, I mean, considering that the majority of them were deists, in fact, I'm not even sure officially what. James Madison was. Let's see.
They were pretty much mostly deists. I think there might have been a couple of Whigs.
Well, Whig was a political party that developed later on. That came out of the Anti-Federalist Party, if I remember right. Madison was raised Episcopalian, and he attended St. John's Episcopal Church while he served as president, though there's really no evidence leading to what his personal religious beliefs are. In fact, even Madison's scholars tend to disagree on what his religion may or may not have been.
But at least by attending, it shows that he understood the necessity of being able to communicate within that language, within that framework.
Possibly, but that's okay with being able to communicate with somebody. I mean, I can communicate with, I used to be Catholic. I mean, I can communicate with somebody on almost any level you need me to. If we want to talk about politics and things like that, I can sit there and throw data at you, ad infinitum, ad nauseum. But I don't see where a person's religious belief has anywhere near as much impact on their politics that are non-theists. Because like atheism, it runs the gamut. Like there's atheists that support almost every political standpoint. Yes, a good many of them are left leaning or more on the social or more what's termed social liberals. Like I myself, for the most part, am a social liberal. Even though I do share a few conservative standpoints, especially when it comes to economics.
Yeah. And
because for me,
if you personally identified as atheist and that's what your beliefs were, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. What I see you might have difficulty with is if you refused to meet on a middle ground when you were actually writing your opinions, because the judicial opinions And the language that they use has very specific power because it's based on interpretation. And it has to be an interpretation that can hold true for all sides. And a lot of the more public speaking atheist figures that I've seen, they want to avoid any kind of acknowledgement of religious language being used because, for lack of a better words, they find it triggering.
Yeah, some of them do. I mean, personally, if it wouldn't be just an outright sheer cost issue, I would agree with them on the advocacy point of removing "In God We Trust" from the money and stuff like that, because it was never there historically. It was and we still have the Latin phrase on there, "E pluribus unum,"
Yeah.
which just means out of many one. So out of many different peoples, we are one nation. And so,
And the whole
to me,
trust thing,
that holds more weight than "In God We Trust." "In God We Trust" was thrown on there in the 1950s. I want to say 1954, with Eisenhower's religious resurgence.
I think it was part of McCarthyism too.
It was part of McCarthyism too. But McCarthy was a blowhard that had no idea what he was talking about. And
want to hear something you like?
Go for it.
But taking "In God We Trust" off money because money, it does not need to have God's name on it, especially because having the actual name God, God, written down could be seen as offensive to some. There's some religions that they will not do that. It's seen as disrespectful. But more importantly, in the Baptist view of one of the New Testament verses where it says, "Give unto Caesar the things that are Caesar, give unto God the things that are God," you wouldn't really want to have God's name associated with something in government to create like a conflict of interest like that, because it's basically tying God to the power of earth, which is not an appropriate separation of church and state.
Okay. And see, that's where I come up against a lot of things, is that principle of the separation of church and state. Okay, yes, it doesn't say that explicitly in the Constitution. That's neither here nor there, but it's established in Jefferson's writing to the Danbury Baptist Church. And even so, when he talks about that separation of church and state, part of it is him referencing a sermon that was given by some pastor or church organization back in the UK, or back in England at that time, from the mid to late 17th century, that stated quite clearly that to preserve religious freedom, there needed to be a wall of separation erected between the state and the church. So it was very explicit that it was the government needs to stay out of church affairs and the church needs to stay out of governmental affairs.
And just an example of what they would have been referring to would have been mandatory tithing, for example, to the state church.
Right. Mandatory tithing to a state church, or the express establishment or promotion of one religion over any other. And so, to some degree, I would see putting "In God We Trust" on the money as a violation of that separation. And that's in large part the way most of the atheist community feels about that as well. But also, it's the inherency of the First Amendment protections that we have. Freedom of religion is also freedom from religion, and most people don't seem to really get that these days.
So would you say that in the atheist community that people view atheism as just as valid as a personal belief system as some kind of theism? Or do you think that there's a large proportion of people that see atheism as superior and theism as inferior?
It would largely depend on who you talk to, because no two atheists are alike. I mean, like I'll take for instance Matt Dillahunty. I agree with him on the atheism topic. I agree with him on quite a few of the philosophical topics. He and I would probably differ quite widely when it came to political things and stuff like that. For the most part, the fact that I'm an atheist has no real bearing on what political stances I hold. It's just one part of me. It's just one part of my identity, because I firmly believe in holding a position because evidence and logic and reason lead you to that conclusion over any other. That's one of the reasons why I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God, for the plain and simple fact of there is no evidence to support the existence. There are no logically coherent arguments that would lend credence to a supernatural entity existing. And because of that, because there's no logical coherence to the arguments, by definition, they are not reasonable. That doesn't mean that a person who is religious or who is theistic is incapable of reasoning or incapable of being rational. It's just that that particular position, from a logical standpoint, from a philosophical standpoint, I see as irrational, because any argument in favor of the existence of a deity has been ripped apart. I'll give, for instance, one of the more famous ones, and it's one of the Thomistic arguments from Thomas Aquinas. Now, I'm probably going to butcher it because I'm going off the top of my head and not going to waste the time Googling it. And so, if someone wants to correct me in the comments or give me the appropriately worded syllogism, please do so, and we can revisit that at a later date. Otherwise, here we go. Is talking about causality. Is that because it derives eventually from the Kalam cosmological argument. Things begin to exist, therefore the universe, things that begin to exist have a cause. The universe exists, therefore the universe has a cause. That's the long and short of it. It doesn't even establish a basis for a deity. All it establishes is that the universe has a cause. But Thomistic arguments go a bit further, talking about efficient causality and things like that. The unmoved mover, going back to Aristotle, is where Aquinas derived a lot of his modal arguments from. And it's talking about cause and effect going all the way back to the beginning and saying that at the end of it, God is the only reasonable conclusion to draw from this. But it's a leap in logic, because all that's established is cause and effect. And also Thomistic arguments, especially modal arguments and causality arguments, are derived from Aristotelian physics, which relies on to some degree, not a steady state universe, but perfect celestial procession, or perfect procession of the planets, which we know that's not the case. And in fact, it was also predicated on the idea that the stars don't move, and we know that they do. I mean, so from a physics standpoint, it just starts to fall apart, because that's where the reason is derived from. But it's still trotted out all the time. It's mostly a Catholic argument that comes up. I know I even was a proponent of this argument at one point, and I've since come to a more reasonable standpoint.
Yeah, and you can tear apart the history and the background and the misunderstanding of cosmology at the point, but the argument is basically
cause and effect.
Things have a source. Right?
The argument is effectively cause and effect. But again, when you look at things from a scientific standpoint, it starts to fall apart, and it starts to fall apart rather quickly. Because, okay, yes, we do have causal chains and things like that. But what is a key component of cause and effect? Does an effect ever come before a cause?
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't. That effect can subsequently become a cause for a further effect, but that effect cannot have occurred prior to the cause. And so, because of that, one of the key components of cause and effect is temporality, time. So, when you go back to the Big Bang, the singularity, the moment of rapid expansion, as far as we know, time didn't exist because this is a point of infinite density, infinite mass, and infinite energy. Time didn't exist at this point, so there is no, as far as we are capable of understanding as human beings right now, there is no before the Big Bang. And it gets into some really, really weird physics and things like that. So I won't bore you with that one because it can get really pretty dry and it is really difficult to understand. And I'm not even sure I have total command of the topic at all. I mean, I am
Well,
by no means a PhD physicist like someone like Lawrence Krauss or Tyson or someone of that nature.
maybe we'll be able to talk about that a little bit later, because I have like most of my scientific understanding is based on science fiction and rudimentary reading of Scientific American and whatever Google throws at me.
Okay.
But here's
Well,
the
maybe we can
idea
do a sci-fi. We can do a sci-fi special on the next Sunday service. We'll pick a fandom and we'll start talking about some of the stuff within that. I think that'd be fun. Personally, I'd vote for Star Wars because I'm a big Star Wars nerd.
I like the DC universe, but I'm okay with some Star Wars. All right, so here's an interesting idea, kind of a closing thought.
Okay.
But it's not really a closing thought on this. Actually, I should go ahead and clarify. The second thing that I was going to say, if we were to come to the table, the first thing about pro-life would be, don't use my money to pay for it.
Okay.
If it's explicitly like an elective abortion, don't use my money for that.
Okay.
The second that I'm willing to concede, not a lot of people are, but I see this as compatible with my views. If these rights are founded upon a right to privacy, then there should be no public advertising of quote unquote abortion rights. There should not be any discussion of elective abortion or anything of that sort. Why are these things not just being handled as medical procedures with patient-doctor confidentiality, where no one outside of that relationship has to know?
I think because in large part you have pro-life activist organizations that spend their days camping outside of abortion clinics, and I'm not gonna say harassing individuals coming and going from there, although some of them do. But we've seen evidence in the past of some of these groups doxing people, and so it brings that whole thing to the public fora again because of situations like that, because they keep it in the public view.
Yeah, this is going to go back a little bit to what we were talking a little bit earlier about the foundation of morality and ethics. But historically, if we go back to like the late 19th century, early 20th century, a large reason why we have it that way is because of pro-choice activist groups that were trying to get government funding for population control.
In some parts of the early 20th century, yeah, Margaret Sanger did have some clout when it came to stuff like that. Yes, she did.
Going into the middle,
late right.
There was also can't remember her name, but there was a environmentalist activist that became heavily anti-immigrant, and she was one of the early or mid 20th century supporters, and continued to have discussions of sterilization and population control as a way to decrease immigration and coming to America.
Okay.
So
So something that someone brought up in a Facebook group that I'm a part of, there that I have my channel as a part of. It's a public group just called Fibs and More. It's an offshoot of a topical generation thing, and I kind of wanted to get your take on this because I just kind of gave this a cursory read, and it's really interesting. It's called "The Mother Tongue: English and How It Got That Way," and it was written by a guy named Bill Bryson. And you might find this really pretty interesting, just because we both like talking about language and what things mean within that. So, although was an immensely long time ago, some 20,000 years before the domestication of animals and the rise of farming, these Cro-Magnon people were identical to us. They had the same physique, brain, looks, and unlike all previous hominids who roamed the earth, they could choke on food. Now, that may seem a trifling point, but the slight evolutionary change that pushed man's larynx deeper into his throat and thus made choking a possibility also brought with it the possibility of sophisticated, well-articulated speech. Other mammals have no contact between their airways and esophagi. They can breathe and swallow at the same time, and there is no possibility of food going down the wrong way. But with Homo sapiens, food and drink must pass over the larynx, and believe the epiglottis is what protects that, on the way to the gullet, and thus there is a constant risk that some will be inadvertently inhaled. In modern humans, the lowered larynx isn't in position from birth. It descends sometime between the ages of 3 and 5 months. Curiously, this is also the precise period when babies are most likely to suffer from SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. At all events, the descended larynx explains why you can speak and your dog can't. I found that was a really interesting little read there.
that is interesting.
I mean, and I honestly had never thought of it that way. So June with Fibs and More, she's the creator of that group and all that. Thank you very much for bringing that up. That was really cool. And I think I might actually try to do a bit of a deeper dive on that in the future to see kind of where all that goes.
Back to the whole
really interesting.
Like what is so exceptional is that we can choke.
Well, but because we can choke, we can also speak
and have articulate conversations, and therefore share our ideas and possibly build on.
And so that particular evolutionary happening, I would think, in large part, is also a great reason as to why we have advanced as far as we have, is the ability to adequately communicate with each other in such a way that we can really get a point across beyond growling, snarling, showing our teeth, or being aggressive and things like that. I mean, we can communicate complex ideas and articulate complex emotional thoughts and things of that nature that animals simply can't. So that may be one of the reasons why we don't have, say, I don't know, Troadude. If a Troodon had somehow been the dominant species along the evolutionary track and gotten to the as close to hominid stage that we are now.
Yeah. So really our only competitor would be something like an ant that could communicate without needing to vocalize it.
True, they communicate through pheromones, but even so, those are still just pheromonal impulses. They don't communicate complex ideas. Yeah. Although it would be kind of interesting if at some point humanity somehow developed this far more excessive than we currently have pheromonal expression between each other, and we're able to communicate that way as well, at least in a generic sense. Although I think that would lead to a whole lot of problems right off the bat. But it would be interesting to see that play out. Say what?
Well, I'm going to go ahead and have to call it for today. But
all right,
next time, and we will definitely continue on this. I had a lot of fun.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad that you were able to come on and whatnot. And so you think maybe we could start making this a more regular thing? Try hitting on this about noon each Sunday?
Yeah, we could try that.
All right.
I'll
Cool.
try to. If I can't do it on a Sunday, then I will give you a head notice so that we might be able to pre-record it or something and then share.
Okay. Sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Harry, I know you don't have a YouTube channel, so here's where I do my shameless shilling for a quick, brief moment. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the Atheist Reformation today, or watching and seeing my ugly mug talk to Harry today. If anyone wants to show support for the channel, please just like, share, and subscribe. If you want, you can check out the Atheist Reformation on Facebook, Twitter. We even have a Patreon page. The Twitter is not as active as I would like it to be, but I'm working on remedying that. So if anyone wants to check out more, come on back by and have a great day. Thank you once again, and have a wonderful evening.